Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look then at what is on the front pages as they come in. So coming up, we'll be seeing what's making the headlines with Pippa Crerar, political editor of the Daily Mirror, and Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun. Great to see you both. As ever, though, straight to the front pages. And most of them, as you might expect, are leading on the lifting of restrictions on July the 19th. So to the Telegraph then, it's now or never, their front page, echoing the Prime Minister's words. It's the same take for the Daily Mail. It's now or never, the paper says. Meanwhile, the Financial Times leads on the lifting of restrictions despite warnings from scientists about the rise in the number of COVID cases. The Guardian labels the move a COVID-19 gamble. The Metro also leads on the PM's announcement on restrictions today with the headline, "Boris rolls the dice." The Eye leads with the promise of an increased vaccination rollout as rules around face masks are lifted. Free Lions, keeping the football frenzy alive. The Sun says the Prime Minister has torn up social distancing laws. Masking for trouble, that's the front of the Mirror, which notes there is mounting concerns over the decision to scrap mandatory face coverings. And the Daily Star pokes fun at Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's former top aide, calling him ludicrous. Anyway, so Pippa Crerar, Harry Cole are here. So do you get a sense from those newspapers then, Harry, that some of this is controversial and that people have different views about this, or do you think most are supportive? There's a lot of gambles thrown in there.
Yeah, I think like lots of these things, the dividing line will come down on what your view of Boris Johnson is and what your view of the government is. These things tend to find a sort of natural division at the moment. Yes, it is a gamble. Cases are going up. But we've got to remember what the promise was. It was, get jabs in the arms to the most vulnerable, protect the NHS. All of the data at the moment shows that hospitalisations, while creeping up, are at a stage where even Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance have said are not any threat to overwhelming the NHS. So at some point, a political decision has to be made of at what level can we live with the virus, like we do with other diseases, like we do with the flu. Not saying these are the same thing, but flu kills thousands of people every year. We don't lock down for that. So it's it is a tough call, but someone has to make it, and we elect our politicians to make these decisions. And when they do, it's on their head be it. But I don't think the sort of I don't think you only have to look around the high streets and around the shops, around the pubs, around the parks, to see, I think, the public are slightly voting with their feet on restrictions and further carryings on. If people want to wear masks, I think they will. But I think it's almost sort of reflecting of reality of, people are able to make a judgment for themselves and they're going on with their lives.
And your newspaper, The Mirror, Pippa, one of those not entirely cheering this political decision. But do you buy this Daily Telegraph take, it's now or never? The idea that it's better to do it now with the natural firebreak of the summer holidays, which they seem to be heavily relying on, than do it in the winter when it might be worse?
Well, I think Harry is right to say that it's a tough call for whoever has to make the decision. And obviously it's one that the government has put a lot of thought and obviously the scientists as well into. I happen to think, it wouldn't surprise you to hear, that they have not made the right decision. I think that suggesting it's now or never is actually disingenuous. I think it's rather overly simplistic messaging to suggest that there's a binary choice between lifting all the restrictions all on one day, or perhaps having a more gradual approach until we get to a point where, as you rightly say, Anna, more of the population is vaccinated. By July the 19th, we should have potentially 2/3, if we're lucky, of the population having had having had their jabs. That's obviously fantastic, but it's not everybody. There'll still be millions of people, including those who can't have a jab because they are either clinically vulnerable or for other reasons, they won't be protected. And of course, let's not forget children. And, letting the virus run rampage through, the younger generation seems to be the strategy here in order to kind of bolster herd immunity as an outcome for the entire population. So I don't think it's fair of the government to say it has to be now or never. I don't think that's right. I think there are definitely merits to lifting restrictions right now. And Harry's right. People are fed up. with living their lives by these strict rules. But I don't think you have to do it all now in one big bang, which frankly feels like a big gamble.
Yes, and indeed that is the theme from the Metro and a number of the newspapers. Boris rolls the dice. Just on that specific point that Pippa made there, allowing this to run rampage through younger people, effectively herd immunity by the back door. It stops the JCVI having to make that really controversial decision about whether to vaccinate the under 18s. Is that what we're seeing here, Harry?
No, absolutely not. The JVCI are going to make that decision regardless of any lockdown. And this is about longer than just this summer. It's about next winter. It's about next year. It's about booster jabs. This ain't over. This is going to rumble on for a very long time. And the idea that allowing kids to stay in school is letting the virus run rampant. Sorry, try saying that with after a long day. The damage of kids not being in school is far greater than the risk they have of the virus, or indeed the risk they have of spreading it back to their vaccinated, mostly vaccinated parents. So look, it is a tough call. But the point that Pippa was making, that we shouldn't just have a big bang lift off in one day, we haven't. This has been a phased. We've been talking about this damn roadmap for so long, since March. It began on March the 8th. The big bang, actually, if we're honest, was in April, and then May. Getting pubs and restaurants and shops to reopen, that was the real sort of, I think, big jump. And actually, the feared sort of surge in the virus didn't actually happen at that point. We were told that the cases were going to go up at every single stage of this unlocking, and actually that just didn't happen. This has been a phased unlocking, and actually the difference between where we are now, give or take a few stadiums of where people are going to probably be tested or have to be double jabbed to enter anyway, is actually, I think, not quite, it's not quite the leap that people think it is.
I mean, I guess the problem is we've got this Delta variant. We know it's a tricksy one. We're on a 9-day doubling time. If you look at the coronavirus map of the UK, the interactive one, cases really are soaring in many places. And this idea of personal responsibility, which is writ all over your newspaper, The Sun, if we have a look at that, free lines and the thumbs up from the Prime Minister, is that really this isn't, it's first of all an abdication of your own decision-making by government, and secondly that it's not just up to you what you do, because what you do affects other people, and there are people out there for whom this means you stay at home again because you're scared.
I think that these two things aren't separate issues. You can be responsible for your own safety and responsible for other people. No one is stopping you from wearing a mask, but do you really want to live in a society where you're fined £6,500 for breaking a rule just by getting on a train? I don't want that to last forever. I want that to be gone as soon as possible. And you say that the case rates are going up. Cases, yes, are going up, but crucially, the promise that we were given is protect the NHS. Stop the NHS from falling over. It doesn't matter if cases go up if people are vaccinated in a vaccinated population, because those graphs, go on the dashboard today, look at the graphs that were used in that press conference today. Cases are going up, deaths are flatlining, and hospitalizations are creeping up at a level, if you compare to where we were in the foothills of the second wave, it is a vastly different scene. There is no threat to the NHS being overwhelmed, and that was the promise. We stayed at home to protect the NHS. The NHS is not under threat now. We should be allowed to carry on with our lives.
7-day average deaths is 18. Which is vastly different, as Harry says, from January and February, Pippa. If we take a look at The Guardian, Johnson sweeps away lockdown restrictions. Again, that word gamble, in a COVID-19 gamble. And the paper going on to suggest that the planned changes make England an outlier in much of the rest of the world, where restrictions remain to combat infections. Is now the right time, is the question. And if we don't do it, what happens come the autumn when kids go back to school and universities return?
Well, I think that, The Guardian's suggesting that we're going to be the most unrestricted society in Europe. We also, of course, have one of the highest vaccination rates in Europe, so that shouldn't be disregarded. Harry was talking about sort of the incremental changes as we've come out of the roadmap. I guess really the big one here that a lot of people will be concerned by is face masks, because while the government says that it's down to personal responsibility, actually it's very difficult for people to choose what risk they want to take when it's actually other people's masks that are going to be protecting them. And I thought it was a very telling moment in the press conference earlier when Boris Johnson was asked whether he would wear a mask, and he said, well, it depends on the circumstances and it's all about personal responsibility. And then the same question was asked to Chris Whitty, who said that actually wearing one is the thing we can do to protect one another and that it's about common courtesy. And then suddenly Boris Johnson sort of interjected and said, well, yes, absolutely, you're quite right. I'm obviously going to wear one in crowded places, and it's simple courtesy, as though that hadn't been his instinctive reaction. And that was very telling to me. You know, this is a prime minister who at his heart is a libertarian that doesn't like telling people what to do and doesn't like imposing rules. We've seen that throughout the pandemic. Throughout, he struggled with bringing in lockdowns and so on. And so his instinct, particularly now he's backed up by a health secretary, Sajid Javid, of the same bent, as opposed to Matt Hancock, who I think probably was a bit more sort of cautious and you know, probably did put sort of the data first and listen to the scientists. He's now in a position where you know, he's free to sort of, you know, make decisions based entirely on his own judgments about personal responsibility. And it's a very definite shift in tone.
Absolutely. Well, after the break, we will talk more about face masks, hear what you think about that as well, Harry, and on the two elements that we wait to hear more about, which is what happens in schools and what happens in terms of travel as well. Two big issues that we'll come back with after this break.
All the things we buy, the food we eat, are fueling the loss of nature and also increasing the risk of climate change. So clearly something has to be done. And so we're calling for a 3/4 slashing of our footprint. Let's remember, this is just what's happening in the UK. It's also kind of factors in the things we import from overseas as well, the food we bring from overseas, the clothes, the cars and so on. But what the report also says is basically speaking, there's a lot of flexibility in the system. We can make those changes, those really substantial changes, without massively impacting our lives. So don't forget, the government has already committed to a 78% reduction in greenhouse gases. So these things are perfectly doable. And actually, the economy could benefit as a result as well. So in this country, it might be a surprise to hear that we waste about 10 million tonnes of food and drink every single year, 10 million tonnes. So just think about what it costs to produce that in terms of time, resources, processing, transport, and so on. So it's horrifying that we waste 10 million tonnes, but 70% of that is perfectly edible. So if we could kind of rework the system so that we're not kind of throwing this stuff away. And of course, that 30% that is non-edible for us is edible for plenty of other things, for example, insects. And there are really good systems up and running already that take food waste, feed it to insects, and then we feed those insects to chickens rather than giving them soy, which came from Latin America and it was produced by cutting down rainforest and clearing grasslands and so on. So there's a real win-win situations there. But I think the images you're showing here show us the impacts. And in these last couple of years, we've seen just extraordinary outbursts of fires around the world. The horrible fires we're seeing in British Columbia at the moment. Cyprus I saw yesterday, but Siberia, Amazon, Australia, we're seeing these extreme weather events. Those will become the norm, sadly. And we know that we're losing species around the world as well. And don't forget, since 1900, 500 types of vertebrates have gone extinct. So these are animals no one will ever see again. And those risks will increase as if we don't take action now.
This monastery is under the protection of Russian peacekeepers. I'm Diana Magnay and I'm Sky's Russia correspondent, based here in Moscow.
They can't arrest everybody.
I'm coming from a family of fishermen. Actually, my family has been fishermen for 5 generations. The fishermen catch this plastic by accident. So we give them the motivation and the system to bring it back to the land. We have collected already more than 110,000 kilos of plastic from the bottom of the sea.
The
few years ago, my partner Alex and I, we realised that there was a huge issue with the way cleaning products were being sold. We found they could only be bought in plastic bottles, and once used, these cheap bottles would inevitably break and end up in landfill. Since launching, we've so far saved over 10,000 plastic spray bottles from ending up in landfill.
Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me, Pippa Crerar, political editor of the Daily Mirror, and Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun. Welcome back to both of you. I'm going to go straight to the Matt cartoon, if you will oblige me. Brief encounter, they say, on the train. It's over between us. Now I've seen you without your mask. I'm not so keen. Well, it's a brilliant take, isn't it, of many of the newspapers who are picking up on this critical face mask issue. Pippa, you had your thoughts before the break. Harry, love them or loathe them? Wait to get rid of them? What's your thought?
Yeah, look, it is completely, I loathe them. But as we were arguing behind the scenes, should we say, I would wear one without the threat of the £6,500 fine. I'm sure others perhaps wouldn't. It's become a talker. It's the very easy dividing line. I have a horrible feeling it's going to become the new Leave versus Remain of do you wear a mask after July 19th. I think the Prime Minister was a little bit more nuanced than perhaps some papers have given him credit for tomorrow. He did make this he uses this example of, would you wear a mask on a crowded tube train? Yes. But should he be criminalised should people be criminalised if you're the only person in the carriage on the last train home? Should you be facing a fine for not wearing a mask then? And, you walk past a crowded, often like round Parliament, for example, where Pippa and I are based. If you're walking through big crowds outside who are gathered, not often to protest these things, you put your mask on. If you're, if you're sitting in the office by yourself, do you really need to? There is an element of personal judgment that's needed on these things. I just think there can be a grey area on this. We are, a sophisticated democracy. We are, an intelligent community. We can make these judgments for ourselves. And the idea that either the law must be wear a mask or face a fine, I don't want that to carry on. And we were talking earlier before the break about, Boris Johnson being this libertarian who struggles with all these great diktats. I want our leaders, whoever they are, of whatever stripe, to feel awful, to struggle about doing these things. I really want them to wrestle with, with these big decisions and not infringe on our liberties any longer, a day longer than they need to. And I think it's quite refreshing that government want to back off because, frankly, it's been a horrible, horrific, awful year where the government has way overstepped any government in modern times, certainly in peacetime. And, I want a government to be washing their hands of those orders as quickly as possible because it's a very slippery slope if they don't.
Yeah, Harry, we've only got 1 minute left. Just very quickly then, your paper, The Mirror, Pippa, Masking for Trouble is your take on this controversial of all elements. The I2 double jabs pushes masks rule is lifted. Very quickly, what do the public feel about this? Are people genuinely divided?
I think it's not the 52-48 Brexit divide that Harry suggests it might become. Ultimately, people are protected by other people's masks, which is why the personal responsibility element is an issue. There was a YouGov poll today which suggested that 71% of people want masks to remain compulsory, not forever, but until such a point that more of the population is vaccinated. And that's on public transport, slightly fewer. In shops, 66%, but still an overwhelming majority of the public back them. Hopefully, that'll translate into people actually wearing them. But sadly, as somebody who regularly travels on the tube, buses and trains, I think that without the pressure of the legal enforcement, the legal threat of a fine, lots of people just won't bother.
Pippa, Harry, thank you. And I know you'll be staying with us for the next part of our programme, which starts in a few minutes' time. Now let's take a look, though, at the weather.